Hello and welcome, and we're here at Holistic Investments, and I'm your host, Konstantin Kogan. And I have an amazing guest today, Mona Tiesler, who's the head of investments of Tokentus and the founder of a very famous syndicate. Hi, Mona.
Hi, nice to be here.
Nice to have this episode with you. Like we met in London recently, right? And now we're having this episode. So really exciting to learn more about your investment thesis and about your story. How did you even get to the crypto? But before that, traditionally, I want to throw a legal disclaimer that this content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or any other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or any other advice. So now we can talk about anything we want, right? Even about publicly traded companies or anything else. Um,
Perfect.
let's start from the beginning, right? So I know you have a tremendous career where you were C-level executives, like, you graduated from a prestigious university. And so tell us a little bit more, like, how was its transition from the traditional industry, I would say, to Web3 world? When did it happen and why did it happen?
Yeah, of course. I'd love to share a little bit about my journey. It's definitely not a straight line. I'm originally from Germany, but I studied in the UK, and I actually did a psychology degree and a management degree, and became a consultant. So I went into, traditional, typical strategy consulting. Back then, people were saying, "Oh, either you become a banker or you become a consultant." And I was like, "Okay, I'll become a consultant." So that's what I did. Um, Actually, during my university time, my first contact with Bitcoin was in 2013 while I was at uni, and I did a little conference around Bitcoin and digital assets at the university, but it wasn't so well received because people were doing things with Bitcoin online, maybe buying certain things, etc., that weren't the best. So it
What was
wasn't
the
that well
year?
received. 2013.
Hmm.
So I was relatively cheap back then, and specifically compared to now. But I didn't really end up going into the field. It was interesting. I was fascinated specifically around the philosophy of Bitcoin, but forgot a little bit about it. Sadly, wish I didn't. But I then, like I mentioned, became a consultant, and then I ended up working in London for almost 4 years. But I really wanted to do something entrepreneurial. So I actually went back to Germany and I founded the German entity of a education technology startup that originally had originated out of New Zealand and grew that ed tech company across the European market, specifically in the German speaking regions. And kind of decided, okay, what's next from here? And I really, really wanted to become an investor. I thought, being in strategy consulting and having some entrepreneurial experience now, being an investor is a great next step. But it was quite tough to get into venture capital. So I said, okay, I'm going to do an MBA to learn all the financial services skills and try to pursue that career. And this is what I did. I went to INSEAD, which is a university in France and Singapore. And
One of the best, by the way.
yeah, it's a great uni. It's a great uni. It's a really great MBA school because it's focused specifically on that, and it offers a lot of, venture capital courses, etc. So it was a really good fit for me. Sadly, I was there during the pandemic, so it was a little bit less open than it might usually be for other years, but it gave me the opportunity to really, really think about what I want to do. And I remembered the Bitcoin white paper during that time, and I thought, there's something there. I looked back into cryptocurrencies, what the market had done since the last 7 years, and was fascinated about everything that had happened since my initial contact, and decided, okay, I actually want to go into the Web3 space. So I graduated still while the pandemic was on, and I couldn't really at that point figure out of the best way to be in the investment space and be in cryptocurrencies. And my skill set was naturally more aligned with being in the startup world, being an operator. So I joined a cryptocurrency fintech investment app in Berlin, and worked there as chief of staff to the founding team and C-level team, which then finally got me into the job that I now am doing, which is venture capital investing specifically into Web3 companies at a publicly listed entity called Tokentus Investments in Germany. And my role there is to run the investments together with my colleague Benedict into Web3 startups in the early stages.
Amazing, yes. So this is an interesting journey that you went through, and I know it took you some time. So now it's already almost 3 years that you're with Tokentus.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And so get us through, like, your day to day, right? So how do you approach due diligencing the projects? How do you source them? Like, what is your priority that you're looking at, like, while you're looking at the project, right? So it's a little bit the flow.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I'll start with how do I find the projects? I think they're kind of let's call them pillars, 3 pillars. First, I actually research, thinking about, okay, what do I think is a very interesting topic right now? Which problems do I see? And where are there emerging companies that are, building, for example, Deepin is a good example. That was not something that was around when I started, called Deepin back then. Right now it has a name, a narrative, a clear bucket that people can bucket projects in that are now so-called Deepin. But the ethos behind Deepin has been around for a while. So kind of figuring out, okay, what's actually going to become very interesting in the future? What are the future narratives? So that's something I try to do through research and try to identify companies in that space. I do that, for example, also through scrolling through Twitter, right? Or speaking to other venture capital investors about, exchanging ideas and what do you see? What do you see? What have you read, etc. Which leads me to my second pillar, which is actually exchange with other venture capital investors, often also from funds that have more prominent names. So then there's also a great exchange of deals from different perspectives, different geographies, different funds that do have a much bigger size maybe than we do, etc. So that's a very, very good way of sourcing deals as well. And then one of my favorite ways of sourcing deals is actually through other founders. So founders that have worked with me or my colleagues that I have met at conferences, that I have met through friends or acquaintances in the industry who recommend other founders or who are building the next thing. And I love that because that's usually a very, positive exchange and a very trustworthy exchange. And I forgot one more. I think it's actually a fourth pillar, which is I often speak at conferences. I attend a lot of those conferences around the world with, within the Web3 space, and speaking to founders, also mentoring at hackathons, is also a really, really good way to find young projects that have a lot of potential in the future and that, I can also maybe support a little bit with some of the operational experience I have from previous startups that I've been a part of.
So demo days, I'm sure, are part of it as well, right? So
Yes.
yeah, that's how I think every successful VC is sourcing the deals. So now you mentioned about the size. Now I have to ask you, like, so what is the size of your fund? Again, if you cannot disclose, at least you can explain us maybe what is the typical like yearly allocations that you distribute? Like, so how many projects can you fund like an average per year?
Yes, great question. So we are, as we mentioned, a public entity on the German stock exchange Xetra, and we are actually not as active maybe as some other funds. So we do up to 12 investments a year. So on average, maybe one a month, sometimes also less. And our check sizes range between 150,000 to about 1 million. We often, the sweet spot really is in the middle range, I would say. And we are generally follow-on investors. So we tend not to lead deals, but we try to provide a lot of value add because a lot of our shareholders, which in other funds would be limited partners, are part of the German banking network. So we try to provide a bit of an institutional perspective and institutional connections as a differentiating value add to the companies that we invest in. So we also do fund-of-fund investments, which are maybe into funds that are slightly more degen or a little bit more in the entertainment space. So we still have a bit of exposure to that, but invest that money into funds where the general network of those funds are also much more catering to the needs of gaming, for example, startups.
Yeah, I've seen you invested in quite a few funds, like that are, I would say, rather well known in the industry, right? And that we can see from a public website investments, right? So that I know Gumi Crypto with Miko Matsamura are good friends, many other equity deals. So essentially, then the next question is obviously do you invest in equity and tokens or both?
Yeah, so we invest in both, in equity, in hybrid instruments, so something like a safe with token warrant, or into pure tokens. Most of our portfolio you will see is more on the equity side. That is because we do come from a little bit more of a traditional background and traditional thinking. There are a lot more crypto native funds than Tokentus, for sure. But we also do pure tokens at this point. We try to be quite clear and think a lot about where does the value actually accrue. Because I think a lot of funds have a very clear mandate in terms of returning money back to their investors very quickly, which is a massive value add in terms of liquidity in the Web3 space. Whereas for us, as we are a publicly listed entity and the value accrues for us in terms of the share price, we don't have to necessarily divest very quickly. We can hold on to equity or tokens for a longer period of time with a little bit less pressure on providing money back to limited partners within 2-3 years.
That's what we call diamond hands,
Exactly. We're a diamond hands fund.
Yes, I love it. No, but that is actually a very important point because you are correct. Some of the funds, just because of their mandate, how they're constructed, they have to liquidate like a large portion of it, especially when we talk about the tokens, because equity,
yes,
well, more or less, they don't have this luxury, but like with tokens, there is a temptation, right? You have this amazing deal. And sometimes when you have like 20, 50x, like in a bull run, you're like, this is very tempting, and I understand why people do that, right? But it's refreshing to hear that you don't have to, right? In your case. Now let's talk about like the investment thesis in terms of the verticals, right? So what are you focusing on? Is there some verticals that is preferred for you, financial infrastructure? I've seen you invested in very, very different. Projects, so maybe you can help us to understand what is a priority right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot to answer your question around due diligence aspects that I look for, so I'm happy to answer that. I got a little bit carried away with the previous explanation, but to answer this question specifically, so we tend to invest for the most part in what I call financial services Web3 infrastructure. So this isn't necessarily DeFi per se, even though DeFi would fall under that umbrella, but it's around the infrastructure of the future around, payments, transactions, financial instruments, which could be, for example, the SWIFT network for tokenized asset trading, or something along the lines of accounting for, a rather difficult new market for rather stoic governmental taxation bodies. Or also, we do some, I would say, projects that are aligned a little bit more on the institutional side. So, for example, community management for brands that want to enter Web3, or also even quests for companies in Web3 that want to, showcase their new projects and provide rewards. So it's rather broad, but I would say the main focus is around more of that financial services Web3 infrastructure, because again, being very ingrained in the German banking network, there's a value add that we can clearly provide to startups that want to, tap into that.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, so most of the, if you look at the strategies that you invest in, most of it is equity, but I also saw that in some projects you invested in a way of convertible loan agreement, which is so maybe you can, for some people who are not familiar with this type of an investment, you can explain how does it work?
So generally, the convertible loan agreement that we did, for example, with one of the companies called Names, is we've invested in initially through equity, but then the subsequent rounds, because we often tend to invest in several rounds of the projects that we see a lot of potential in. They said, okay, we might go down the token route or not. So the convertible note is actually structured in a way, in this particular case, that we could either convert this convertible note into tokens when and if they launch a token. We could also, at that point, say, please pay us back. It was just a loan, right? You have to actually pay us back. This is usually decided by some sort of date or event that occurs for this decision to have to be made. And there's a third option in this particular example of convertible note, where if a equity round is raised at a subsequent time, then there would be even a third choice for us to say, oh, actually, I want to convert this money that I gave you into equity. So a convertible note is essentially a very versatile instrument which can be treated like a loan, which is the difference to maybe a SAFE or a SAFT. So the investor can ask for this to be paid back. Or in our case, with this particular company, we have also the option to potentially turn it into equity or tokens. So it's a rather interesting instrument. We've actually done SPVs, we've done convertible notes, we've done SAFEs with token warrants, or pure equity, or pure SAFTs. So quite a range of different ways of investing into companies.
But if you once you go to, just to clarify also, like once you go to convertible loan agreement and convertible note, like, so you still you wire the funds prior to the, like,
Yes.
if you have a token listing, like, so what is your collateral? It's still only equity, right? So, or only tokens. You don't have like any other tools to kind of mitigate the risk that what happens when the project goes under, right?
That's true. So you wire the funds just like a normal investment. You can think of it like a short-term debt instrument, actually, for the company, which then can be converted into equity in the traditional world. In our Web3 world, it can be often converted into tokens or equity. But if the company does not survive, then most of the time, and this also is, of course, a legal structure aspect that needs to be reviewed every document you sign or that you provide to investors as a startup. But usually it is the case that if the company does not survive, you will also not get your money back, right? It is not a loan that needs to be repaid, even if the money is not there. So there is some risk, but it also, gives the startup potentially even the opportunity. Sometimes they would like to give the money back because, say, for example, they've received a convertible note, so for terms where the token was maybe worth 10 million FDV. And now, the token is theoretically worth 100 million FDV. Of course, they would rather have the investor for the 10 million, right, to ask for their money back so that they have the opportunity to have somebody come in at a much higher valuation. So it really is it's an interesting way to structure your investments, but there are pitfalls, of course, as well.
But then in this case, what you're saying, if they have the ability to choose, like obviously they would always choose to give you back at the same valuation, right? So what is your upside? What are the terms, how you protect yourself so that like you still have the upside, but you protect it from the downside?
So generally the investor chooses, right? Not the startup, essentially. So I'm just saying that if the investor does choose to want their money back and the company's doing really, really well, that's not something the investor should usually go for, right? But if for some reason the investor does say, hey, it was just a loan, I want that cash back, then this might actually be a positive thing for the startup if the startup is doing well, and it is easy for them to repay that loan back to the investor, because they're essentially getting rid of an investor that got in early, so they have in theory, a better, situation for themselves now because they keep much more tokens for other investors at a higher valuation. Yes. But usually, of course, the case is that an investor will say, of course, I want to, convert this convertible loan into tokens, or sometimes also equity. In the Web2 world, it's always equity. Then, everybody wins as well. So it's just a different way of structuring your investment. It's not as common. I haven't seen it that often throughout my career. Usually, we all know it's probably a safe, or a safe with token warrant, or a SAFT. But CLAs are not actually that bad to look at. If you are, if you hear this and you think this is actually potentially interesting for me as a founder, definitely have a lawyer kind of go through with you the pitfalls and the options. But we've seen it work out rather well for startups, I would say, and for us as well.
Amazing. Like, I'm happy to hear that. So like, I think we learned something new today as well. Now, in terms of like your personal like view on the trends, on the current trends, like you mentioned, you constantly research. You have to have to hold your hand on the pulse of the market, right? So, what do you see right now? We are in this like weird, volatile period, right? And when it's like a limbo, so it's neither here or there, right? So, but everyone is who I'm talking to, they're very positive about what's going to happen in October, November, right? So until the end of the year. So give us a little bit of your outlook, like, which trends do you think are going to dominate, let's say, not only by the end of the year, but maybe even next year?
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of my thoughts. I mean, based on some of my research, I would actually say we have the potential for two different kind of big highs in this upcoming kind of 12 months. I would say, one of the bigger highs is, in my personal opinion, likely to be around the November time. I think that can be catalyzed by the US elections, rate cuts, and I would say also a little bit, there's a general sentiment because we're all waiting, right? We're all excited, and the smallest signal of positive evolvement, I think, does cause a bit of a snowball effect. So I think we just need a little bit of a push, right, through a macroeconomic event or a political event that can help us, bring some liquidity back into the market. As we all know, I think there's a lot of startups that are waiting with their TGE for the market to recover. So, I think the lineup of TGEs at this point is probably concerning, but I do think we will see an upswing before the end of the year. Again, I would say probably around the early November time, but purely based on my personal very, very novice chart reading. I think another option that we may see for a upswing in the market is actually like the March-April time. Just because if you kind of look at the 4-year cycles, you can actually see a trend that they're getting slightly shorter in terms of kind of when the top is of the market. And by doing very, very, and I'm genuinely not a trader, I'm really a novice, but just, looking at some of the trends that have occurred, I would say there's also a chance that, March, April will still either see a good high or we will still have a good momentum. My personal opinion, though, is that I don't think this is going to carry on wildly crazy upwards throughout all of 2025. I'm not sure we have enough steam for that. But of course, I want to be more positive than negative, but I am bracing myself for not a huge, huge duration of just up.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think like in November there should be an uptrend, and a lot of the indicators are showing that. So let's hope you're right, and we speculate a little bit.
Let's hope
Now,
we're both right.
yeah, for the sake of the humanity and vision world. So, but in terms of like the trends, let's still like come back to this, like so let's maybe identify top 3, right? So what do you think is going to dominate? So like if you remember a little bit in 2021, at some point like a huge gaming and metaverse trend, which was
right.
supported by Zuckerberg announcing that the metaverse is the new kind of big thing, right? So everybody immediately went this direction. Then we had like some DeFi summer, like, so now it seems like there is a layer 2 dip-ins, like, other narratives are dominating, right? So what are you seeing, and what do you think is maybe undervalued, which is more interesting topic?
I genuinely, so I do think that, the narratives we've seen are actually still going to be dominating. I think, deepen is an area that is dominating. I also think generally we still have a lot of deep tech infrastructure projects that are still capturing a lot of attention. And I'm going to say something slightly controversial, but I think a lot of the time people don't really know what they're doing, like in terms of what the startup is actually doing. But there's a lot of buzzwords around ZK, MPC, data availability, whatnot, and it's all kind of mushed into one. Ideally, we'll bring AI into it as well, and then these startups often get looked at a lot. For example, on launch pads, right? They have a lot of success on launch pads. I think there's definitely data that I can find in retrospect, which will back that up. I don't remember exactly where I saw it, but I did see quite a decent amount of information kind of saying, well, it's actually things like buzzy technical terms that actually provide a lot of uplift in specifically in like launches on launch pads, or something that provides like where community invests. I still think that we will see further aspects around, modularity, and that will be bringing up a lot of startups that will be quite popular. And I think thirdly, definitely the AI and Web3 intersection. Like, I know we've been swamped with projects that are AI Web3 intersection of some sort. But this is quite controversial, and I've had many conversations about this. I even, spoke at the University of Surrey. I did a lecture on this. In the audience was a researcher. No, sorry, she was a head of department of the University of Leicester, who challenged me quite clearly on some of the things I said. And the main debate here is that, I think there is definitely positive intersection in terms of blockchain can make AI more transparent. It can really unpack that black box to a certain degree. It can't say this picture is real, but it can say the data that went into this picture was taken or set at this point in time, from this source. And that is, I think, helpful for some of the deep fake related things that we are seeing with AI and some not so good information. And I think, AI can make Web3 or blockchain technology much faster in terms of complex computation. It can make it much more user-friendly in terms of, interfaces. And of course, for example, trading, portfolio rebalancing, all those things. Arguably, when the algorithm is trained very well, can just use and have so much more data input in a much shorter period of time than a lot of humans can. So there's quite a lot of use cases, and we can talk about decentralized AI. We can talk about using decentralized GPUs in order to get, compute power for AI, etc. But that is a narrative, I think, that will still be dominating this year. And I do think there's a lot of value in that. The argument from the head of department from the university, the other university in the UK, was telling me that, without humans, AI and blockchain technology cannot actually work because there's not enough overlap at this point, which she may very well be right on, right? So it's just an interesting space to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have an audience that is thinking differently, right? That's how we learn. And so I had this situations too when I was also giving a lecture, and there's a lot of tricky questions around this. But coming back to the narratives that you still believe in personally, right? So I understand
Yeah.
you have a thesis that is closer to the firm, right? But it's also you're managing a syndicate, and I'm sure you're angel investing on a side, right? So as we all do. So I'm sure it might be a little bit different, right? So if you were to bet, let's say from like I will ask you more like I would say provocative question in terms of like if there is one project that you already invested or you're looking to invest, you don't have to name it if you're not comfortable, but if you were to bet on one that will become a unicorn, what would it be?
It's a good question. I'll answer that in a second. But there's a first part of what you said, which I think deserves almost its own little 4 or 5 sentences, which is, I think, one of the areas that we don't spend enough time thinking about, and where there's a lot of investment opportunity, is actually that actually this, before we go into the big Web3 world with everything decentralized and users have complete control over their data and digital identities, I think Web 2.5 is a really critical bridge that we're in now, where we need to combine the best of both worlds, right? We need to combine established infrastructure with large user bases, and also the emerging capabilities of the blockchain technology to make everything more decentralized, to make everything more transparent, and giving back to the people that are actually providing their data. But we are, in my opinion, still in a very important transitional phase where not enough money is, put in terms of investment is given, because for a crypto fund, it's often not, crypto enough, these Web 2.5 related solutions. And for a Web 2 fund who do some investments into blockchain, they're still quite, I think, careful with investing into blockchain technology companies, specifically if there's a token. because of regulatory unclarity still in a lot of geographies, and just lack of knowledge to really do due diligence on some of these projects if you're not a really native in the space.
Mhm.
So I think there's a huge opportunity to really see that there's blockchain technology can really power real world applications, and there's so much that we can do in that space in the interim before we kind of move into a more highly Web3 driven world where much more is powered by a decentralized future. So that's just kind of my personal area, which I think is worth focusing on more in the future. And that's kind of combined a little bit with consolidation of the industry, because I also think there's going to be a lot of industry consolidation. I mean, it's quite every industry through every cycle of its growth has essentially consolidated at some point, right? And there's not a lot of focus on this. And I think there's kind of sufficient or very clear value that can be created by analyzing and thinking a little bit about, who are the custodians, the accounting software, the payment solution providers, the digital identity players that are actually able to gobble up some of those hundreds of players to become more dominant. And also think about, some of the larger Web2 companies, they want to enter Web3, right? Who are they looking at partnering with or even buying? And that's something that I think not enough people talk about. And that's a really, really, really interesting space for investment, I think, at this stage. Because if you get that right, I think you can be part of like a very interesting movement and push towards more people actually in their everyday lives being powered by blockchain technology without even realizing it.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I mean, by the way, something that you mentioned in terms of like, not enough investment, I agree it's always can be more, but like actually when I was reading the reports, like just the Q1, like in 2024, about $2.5 billion were invested in our early stage blockchain focused companies, about 600 plus deals. And just in Q3, another, I think like 2 point something like billion. I don't remember the exact number. It was a Galaxy report. So I compared it like if we go in retrospect, like in 2013, 14, even up to
For
16.
sure.
I mean, this is already a huge improvement. I mean, like most of the venture capital firms, like the big ones, they're actually they're pretty young. We're talking about less than 5 years, right? So we don't even have this 10-year traditional VC, like when there's like fund one, fund two, fund three, pivoting and like evolution. So, and to my feeling, like with all the ETFs movements, with all the derivatives that are becoming like accepted around the world and more liquidity coming into crypto, due to, by the way, distrust to the national currencies. As you know, I'm being in US, you've been in Germany, or let's say London, like on UK, right? We don't feel it this way, to be frank. Like the moment you go out a little bit, the moment you go out to like and speak to kind of like people from Ukraine, people from Venezuela, Argentina, Turkey, when there's like 70% hyperinflation, right? So then you clearly understand for them, this is not an option. This is like the only way how to somehow save their money, like and diversify to make sure there is any type of wealth preservation. So I'm a big believer that you're correct on the long-term trajectory and the consolidation. What I wanted to ask you, do you see also more M&A deals happening? Because you mentioned some of the companies may be bought out, right? So what do you think should happen so that the merger and acquisition in our industry will become more prevalent?
Yeah, just on the previous note, I totally agree with you. I was meaning more in terms of Web 2.5 specifically, that there's not enough investment. So obviously there's a huge growth trend in generally more investment into blockchain powered companies and Web3 related companies. but my point was a little bit around, there is this segment in the middle that is kind of, it's not really crypto native, and it has a lot of value accrual in its equity portion, but it's not really a Web2 company because it's powered by blockchain. So there's this like almost odd middle ground that, at least in my opinion, I find there are not enough investors that are excited about that, because the token is not maybe the main instrument, and sometimes the equity is just where the value accrues, but it's still a blockchain technology company. And so I think there's an opportunity there to find some golden nuggets, and that are going to be, very, very important and catalysts for driving a Web3 being the web versus the web that we have now. So that was kind of my thoughts on that. But consolidation, yes, I think slowly, right? I'm feeling like it's slow. It's a slow process of seeing companies being acquired. And one of the companies in our portfolio which is very focused on B2B, so more working with businesses, they're already going into a Series B, so they're, growing. And they were looking at acquiring a company that does something extremely similar to them, but focused on B2C, right? Because instead of, building out their own B2C arm, hiring a company that's doing, acquiring a company that is doing really, really well, and works in tandem to them, but just kind of going into different segments, is naturally something that they are considering doing in order to overtake competitors, right? And be able to show metrics that Series B investors want to see, which are slightly more numerical than maybe very, very early stages, where there is no cash flow, where there is no product yet a lot of the time. So we do see this more and more. And also, from some of the institutions we talk to, because we do have a lot of institutional connections, they're interested, right, in blockchain technology, specifically in providing more access to financial instruments, to customers, etc. So rather than building it all in-house, if there's a trusted company with a good track record, there's definitely open eyes and open ears for acquisitions.
Nice. I mean, it's good to hear that, because I think that's in the future we will have to build these private equity houses that are focused specifically on the crypto acquisitions. I know only 3, right? And I hope there's going to be like 300 like very soon, right?
Yeah.
Because especially what happens in a bear market, there's a lot of great companies that are struggling and they just need injection of capital, like, and they're not bad businesses. They're just like, they're sometimes just cyclical, right? And they're trying to iterate and ideate to how to change this, but like it's not always easy, right? Because of the complete focus on the economic value towards the token, right? But yeah, I hear you. So like we definitely need more, and also I hope that's gonna be like a good exits for you guys, for your portfolio, and for us as well. So,
yes, we all hope that.
yes, that we need more. So what do you think like we're missing in the industry? If you were to criticize a little bit, like, as an industry, what can we improve? 1 or 2 things that can dramatically change this, like, entire situation.
So one thing I personally see a lot is that not enough people, investors, including the full range of investors, are actually focusing on fundamentals, right? It's, again, maybe a controversial opinion, but I think there's too much focus on, I don't care what the company does, but if the company has a strong narrative, good influential backers that will give them a marketing push. I have a high unlock at TGE and a relatively short vesting schedule, and ideally mine is also better than everyone else's, so I can divest of this asset quicker and a higher at a higher price than others, then I win. I think that's extremely short-termist, and that's for me very much a trading type approach, but it's not actually powering longevity of the industry. And I think, you know, we've seen it in the bear markets. So many tokens go to zero and they never recover. I think the statistic is over 70 or even 80%. And that's because of this type of thinking and gambling, essentially, rather than actually looking at the fundamentals. And that is actually a great way to kind of, you know, answer one of the things I didn't answer at the beginning, and just kind of say, look, some of the things that I think we need to look more into, and this is what I use for due diligence, and maybe my fundamentals that I'm talking about are, you know, thinking about who is behind this, really who is behind this, right? Who are these people? Do they work well together? Are they complementary skill sets? What is their industry knowledge or their knowledge of that product actually relevant for what they're building? Is the product usable? Is there an MVP? Is it just an idea on paper and a really good sales strategy, right? Is the tech sound, secure? Is there a team that is actually dedicated, or at least one person that is dedicated to building out this tech? Is there a clear, you know, product market fit? Is there a clear USP, unique selling point of this startup? How is the competitive landscape? Do they have a chance? How much market share can they actually get? And how sticky are users maybe to other competitors in the market? If we look at generally, what is their cost structure? How much are they spending? Do they have enough runway? How are they planning their runway? You know, those are important things. Yes, of course, we're dealing here maybe a little bit with more the equity thought hat on, but still, right? We've seen foundations spend so much money on marketing initiatives and then not having any more money and having to let go of hundreds of people. So we really need to look into a little bit about, can they manage that money wherever it may be accrued? And then also, you know, partnerships, can they sell? Who are they partnering with? Are these the right partners? Are they just partners on a website, or are they actually doing business with these other companies? Do they have traction? How many users? Are these users sticky? And then last point, in total, I think these are 9 points. Sorry for not being super clear, but I think it's just very important, with the last point being kind of token economics. So the token economy, the utility of the token, you know, is this just a governance token with some rev share because there was no other way of bringing a token to the project because the value doesn't actually accrue in the token, it's just a raise mechanism. I think we need to think about these things, and we need to actually evaluate, and we need to actually do due diligence, because in the end, we're just otherwise funding projects short-termist to make a quick buck, and that's not a way that the industry will survive or provide, you know, really the infrastructure for the future of the web. That's just, in my opinion, being short-termist, really good gambler, but doesn't have enough fundamentals to build what we want to build in terms of the decentralized future, in my opinion.
100%. Yes, I agree with you. I think, you know, that, I mean, yes, can people make a quick buck, as you mentioned, right? You know, with the strategies, correct, but I don't think you can build like a big, like, viable business, right? You know, and that's a big difference, right? You have to focus on something that is long term, and that requires a lot of parameters to come together. And like, part of being a good investor is to see through, like, you know, those promises, because sometimes you can meet like incredible salespeople, right? And as you mentioned, they exaggerate. Let's use the euphemism, right?
Yes.
A lot of things.
Yes.
And then our job is to look like through this exaggeration and see what is real and what is not, right? So 100%.
Perfectly summarized by you, I would say.
But at the end of the day, so what I'm also interested in your case, like, so what's your personal like 5 year like goal and horizon? Like, where do you see yourself? Like, what are you building? Where are you at? Like, I know it sounds like a coaching session, but I wanna I wanna
I
also
love it. It's great.
yeah.
Um, so if you remember my long-winded explanation of my journey to become an investor, it has left its mark, right? And I got here and I really thought about it. And so I do in the future. I love mentoring, I love lecturing, I love working with startups, but I think I would love to do that in the capacity of a venture capital investor with a huge value add. So my 5 year goal is to have my own fund that I can, structure and build on the belief system that I've to some degree outlined also here with you today, and really provide some value add and real value to the startups, as well as being able to tap into areas of the market that are not as explored but have more, in my opinion, are built more on fundamentals.
Perfectly, summarized. Yes, I hear you. I fully support this. Um, there is first of all, where can people find you? Where do you reside more? Is it Twitter, Telegram, LinkedIn?
All three actually. So you can find me, probably easiest to chat to me on either Twitter or Telegram. LinkedIn is rather bombarded with advert stuff.
Yeah.
But I am on LinkedIn. I post a lot of blog articles or also thoughts on LinkedIn. But I think if you message me on Twitter or Telegram, I'm usually very good at responding. So very happy to chat to people on both my handles, both for Telegram and for Twitter, are Crypto Mona and then a T, Crypto Mona T. T is for my last name and Crypto Mona was taken. But it's easy to remember, both Twitter and Telegram, Crypto Mona T.
I love it, Cryptomona. Yes, we will definitely share it in the description. So there's one last question which I normally never notify my guests because I want to be as pure as possible in terms of the reply. And the question is personal again. The question is like, what is the meaning of life to you, Mona?
Peace. The meaning of life to me is peace.
Wow.
In a variety of ways. I think it's about finding inner peace, which leads to outer peace of this world as well. But I think if we, start to realize that it's really a little bit of a waste of energy to worry so much about little things, and to be worried about, oh, this person looked at me weirdly. What's wrong with me? Do I have something on myself? Is my hair bad today? All those little things are a starting point to just not, if you don't think or worry about them so much anymore, you're already so much more peaceful inside, and realizing, it doesn't, why waste your energy on little things like that, and not dwell on some of the things that happened, I think is also quite important, and just provides us with a little bit of this ability to move forward, be reflective, be agile, and grow, but not be so petty. And I think some of these things, and we can talk a whole session about this, but some of these things, in my opinion, lead to a lot more inner peace and also understanding for other people, which can, in my opinion, lead to a lot more outer peace as well, which, I think is really what we should all be striving for.
Beautiful. I fully support this message. I wish everyone peace, and especially in the now in a metaphorical and also like very concrete, like like meaning, especially like I'm coming from Ukraine. Trust me, I understand what is the other side of like the equation, and I really hope that everywhere in the world we will learn how to live in peace together and coexist. This is super important. Like I think that's step zero, right? And
Yeah.
then comes with this comes the inner peace and the outer peace outside, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mona. I think it was really amazing to learn from you, like, and I wish that all your dreams will come true, all your cravings and strivings, like, and I'm sure with this positive outlook and this smile, like, everything should be in place.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. I had a really nice conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.